What would you do if a Category 3 hurricane was heading straight for your family and you could not move them? This is the true story of a mother who refused to abandon her children, even as nature unleashed its full fury upon her. In a quiet corner of Chesapeake Bay, a navigation marker rises 6 meters above the tidal waters below it. Atop that marker sits a large nest built from sticks and marsh grass, weathered by 4 seasons of coastal winds. The female osprey who owns this nest has returned to this exact spot for 7 consecutive years without fail. She knows every rhythm of this bay, the tides, the boat traffic, the summer storms that arrive each August. But on this particular August morning, something far more dangerous than a summer thunderstorm was approaching from the south. A tropical depression near the Bahamas had rapidly intensified into a Category 3 hurricane named Debby, with devastating winds. On the morning of August 7th, the female osprey was pressed low against 3 eggs laid just 9 days earlier. 3 eggs resting beneath her warm body, each one carrying a life that depended entirely on her constant presence. The male had been fishing nearby that morning, but by mid-morning the southeastern wind began building with unusual strength. He did not return. A bird with a 1.6-meter wingspan simply cannot stay airborne in hurricane-force winds. The male followed his survival instinct and flew inland to find shelter before the worst of the storm arrived. But the female stayed. She could not leave. Abandoning the eggs for even minutes would end 3 developing lives. At 9 days of incubation, the embryos inside those eggs would cool below survival temperature within minutes of exposure. So she made her choice. She would face a Category 3 hurricane alone, with nothing but her own body as shelter. By early afternoon, the leading edge of Hurricane Debby reached the Virginia coast with winds exceeding 130 kilometers per hour. The first rain arrived horizontally, driven by gusts so powerful they flattened every blade of marsh grass in sight. Navigation marker OB-17 began to sway under the force of the wind, the steel pole groaning against the storm. A wildlife camera installed on the structure was still transmitting, recording every moment of what happened next on that nest. The footage captured the exact moment the full storm hit. The female's feathers flipped backward, pointing with the wind direction. Her body compressed downward and her wings extended outward and down, forming a complete protective canopy over the nest. With a wingspan of 1.6 meters stretched over a 1-meter nest, she overlapped the edges by 30 centimeters on each side. She created a sealed dome of feathers and bone, with her own body serving as the center of the living shield. She did not take a single break for the next 11 hours and 17 minutes. Not once did she open her wings. Within the first hour, rain soaked through her chest feathers completely. No natural waterproofing can resist rain at that velocity. Water penetrated to her skin. Her body temperature began to fall. A wet bird in high wind loses heat 10 times faster than normal. She compensated the only way she could, by shivering. Continuous small tremors ran through her wing muscles, generating metabolic heat. She was burning energy at a rate normally reserved for active hunting, just to keep the space beneath her 3 degrees warmer. Those 3 degrees meant everything. They were the thin margin between life and death for the embryos developing inside each egg. At the second hour, the first major wave struck the base of the navigation marker with tremendous force from below. Storm surge in Chesapeake Bay during a Category 3 hurricane reaches approximately 2 meters above the normal tide level. The base of OB-17 was completely submerged. Each wave sent violent vibrations up the entire steel structure to the nest. The nest began losing material. Small twigs fell away. Pieces of marsh grass peeled from the rim with every shuddering impact. After each impact, she adjusted. A small shift of her feet, a redistribution of weight, a tightening of her wing seal. She never stood up. She never opened her wings fully. She simply rocked with each vibration, then settled back into position. Then a thick branch forming part of the outer nest wall snapped off entirely. It had been there for 2 full seasons. The branch dropped 6 meters into the churning water below, leaving a gap in the nest wall where protection once existed. Rainwater immediately began pooling on the exposed side where the branch had been. The eggs were now dangerously close to flooding. The female leaned into the gap, extending her left wing an extra few centimeters to cover the void with her wingtip. Her wingtip now rested directly on the nest floor, sealing the breach. She became the wall that the storm had taken. Hour by hour, the nest structure continued to degrade beneath her. The bowl shape flattened into a loose mat of sticks. What had been a carefully constructed platform with raised edges was now held together only by her own body weight, pressing it down. She was no longer sitting on a nest. She was the nest. Her body was all that kept the eggs from being swept away. At hour 6, something extraordinary happened. The wind dropped to near silence. The rain stopped falling completely. The hurricanes I was passing directly over the nest. A pocket of impossible calm surrounded by a wall of destruction on all sides. The female lifted her head and looked around. She turned her beak left and right, scanning the torn landscape of the bay. She did not stand. She did not stretch her cramped wings. She simply lowered her head back down and held her position. She could sense it. The wind was already building again from the opposite direction. The back wall of the hurricane was coming. The second half of the storm was worse. The wind now came from the west, hitting the nest from the completely opposite side. The wing seal she had maintained for 6 hours was now oriented wrong. Everything she had held together faced the wrong direction. She adapted. Without lifting her body off the eggs, she slowly rotated her shoulders and shifted her wing angles to match. In less than 2 minutes, she re-established the protective canopy facing the new wind direction. The eggs were never exposed. The western winds tore at her for 5 more hours. 5 hours of relentless battering from a direction she had not prepared for. Her muscles had been locked in the same position for nearly half a day. The energy reserves in her body were nearly depleted, but she held. Through every gust, through every wave that shook the pole, through every piece of nest that fell away beneath her. 11 hours and 17 minutes after the storm first arrived, the winds finally dropped below gale force. The rain became a drizzle. The camera captured what looks like a sigh, a slow exhalation that made her entire exhausted body visibly deflate with relief. She stayed crouched for 7 more minutes, as if waiting for absolute confirmation that the hurricane had truly passed over her. Then finally, she stood. For the first time in nearly 12 hours, she rose up on her legs and looked at what remained. The nest surface was a wreck, sticks scattered at odd angles. The inner lining of marsh grass washed out in patches everywhere. But there they were. 3 eggs, pale cream with dark brown speckles. Sitting in a shallow depression her body had pressed into place. She lowered her beak to each egg, one at a time, nudging them gently. Checking, confirming. All 3 were perfectly intact and warm. She shook her entire body. Water flew off her feathers in every direction, catching the returning sunlight like scattered diamonds around her. She stretched each wing in full sequence, extending them completely for the first time in nearly 12 hours of unbroken endurance. Sand and debris fell from her feathers as she extended. She preened her matted chest quickly, restoring order to her battered plumage. 2 days later, the first crack appeared in an eggshell. A tiny beak pushed through using its egg tooth, that temporary hatching spike. The first chick broke free into the world, wet and fragile, but alive. The mother watched over every moment of its emergence. The second chick hatched the following day. The third arrived 24 hours after that. 3 lives saved by one mother's refusal to leave. The female had already begun rebuilding. She carried fresh sticks to the platform while her mate resumed fishing the recovering bay waters. The male returned with fish after fish, feeding the growing family he had temporarily abandoned to survive the storm himself. All 3 chicks survived the critical first 3 weeks, the most vulnerable period, when osprey young are weakest and most dependent. They grew from tiny wet bundles weighing less than 60 grams into strong fledglings that could lift their heads and watch the sky. The nest on OB-17 looked different now, reinforced with new material, rebuilt stronger by a mother who understood what storms could take. She does not build for storms. No osprey can predict when the next hurricane will form over those warm Atlantic waters far south. She builds for the eggs that will arrive next spring, and the spring after that, for as long as the marker stands. For as long as the bay produces fish and the tides keep their ancient rhythm along this quiet stretch of Virginia coastline, the nest is never truly finished. It is only ever waiting. Waiting for the next season, the next eggs, the next wind. But somewhere over the Atlantic tonight, warm water is feeding energy into the atmosphere. Another storm is beginning to take shape and grow. And when it comes, she will be here. Wings open, body low, holding everything together until the wind decides it is finally done.